Well, hello and welcome to Pando Horizons. I hope you've already been part of another session and you are joining this one here. We're really excited to have you in this particular session today. In this one, our topic for a conversation is sustainable high performance, and the subtitle Balancing Moonshot Goals and Employee Well-Being. I want to first talk about our wonderful panelists and introduce each in turn, and then we'll get started. So first, I have here Adam Horne, who is co-founder from OpenOrg. Then Alicia Grimes, co-founder of The Future Kind. She's over there on my screen. Marina Gunn, Director of Strategy and Business Development at Plural. There she is. And Nadia Eran, who is a fractional HR leader and thought leader as well. There she is. And we're really happy to be with you here today. So the way we're going to start is just with a very general question about the topic. And the way I'll frame it, and I'll put it to everyone first, so I'd like you each to talk about this a little bit, is when on the topic of sustainable high performance, what's important about that now in particular? So when you think about balancing high performance and sustainability, what does that mean for you and why is that important now? I'm just going to go as per, the normal Zoom organization on my window when Nadia is up there in the upper left-hand corner. So over to you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm so excited to be here. So when I think about balance, for me, my lens is always change management. And so for me, that means bringing people with you. And so when you're trying to think about, we have these big, lofty goals, and then we also have humans being humans, with their layered issues and problems and extra roles that they have outside of the workplace. And so it's trying to figure out, okay, how do we have a win-win? And win-win to me is getting clear on what are people's motivations, making sure that clarity is good on both the organization side and the manager side and the employee side. And all of that is to be able to come all together to the finish line as one, right? And so that's that balancing act for me, is just making sure that we really understand what are we trying to do here, because there's no points for a leader making it to the finish line and everybody else is left behind.
Which happens unfortunately quite frequently, I think, especially in the startup world. Alicia, well, what do you think about what's important about this now?
Yeah, so to build on Nadia's point, I think that for a long time we've seen performance as quite one-dimensional in terms of what that looks like. It's either been, and mainly from the business side of maintaining those goals, hitting those targets at any cost, without thinking about what does that look like from the people side. Or sometimes we can lean more towards the people side and we lose track of what does that look like from a business perspective. So that balance between the two right now is really important. And we have to think about what is the system that supports that to make sure it is sustainable rather than just high performance as well. And that's really critical right now.
Marina, thank you. Thank you, Alicia. Marina, how about you?
Yeah, Alicia's point is really, really great, especially with the balance and how to make it to the finish line. I think just trying to balance consistency and creativity, especially on our team, figuring out how to balance well-being and business goals as well as personal goals for each individual. I think, helping them feel encouraged with individual goals, and then also, how can we align that with business objectives and work together as a team? So when you look, like Alicia said, too individual, and then you lose track of the other milestones you need as a business and vice versa.
Thank you. And last but not least, Adam, what's important about this now in particular?
How can I build on these? So one thing that we see a lot, and we operate a lot in the startup scale up world, but we're seeing a lot of pressure on companies in the last few years to drive see a higher performance with smaller teams. We're not scaling, we're not growing, we're not piling in headcount to get the results that we used to be able to get. So how can we get, for want of a better phrase, more out of people and better results with a smaller team? That puts the conversation of high performance in the spotlight for companies, and makes it even more important to clarify what we mean and work out how we get that. And I think the well-being side's also been thrown into the spotlight even more in recent years because of, talk about it a lot, but COVID and ways of work, and you can't hide from the fact now that people are getting more balance by and large. Most people are anyway, because they aren't working in the way they used to. It's happening. Companies are having to meet that head on and actively think about how we balance that whilst trying to make sure people are performing. So my 2 pennies worth.
No, it's great. This is for anybody. So do we think that I mean, obviously the question is set up a little bit as a dichotomy. Is it well-being? Is it company performance? To what extent is that a fair dichotomy? And to what extent is it possibly a false or misleading dichotomy? Are we thinking about these the right way when we think about them as oppositional or in tension? Maybe there's a different way to think about them. Anybody have thoughts on that? Pregnant pause as people think.
My mind goes immediately to like the world of sports. And there are instances of individuals who have proven that they can perform at the highest level consistently for a very long period of time without detriment to or obvious detriment to their well-being. I don't know what happens behind the scenes, but they can
Right.
continue that for a very, very long time and find that balance. And that suggests to me that it's possible to for the two to work very well together. But actually, what I've seen day to day in the working world is it's very hard to keep the two consistent, and they tend to be more like peaks and troughs. So, first signs of burnout for me on a personal level have actually been when I've been performing really highly. That's the very first sign that I'm heading towards burnout, and that there's like a trough coming at some point soon. So, how do I recognize that, see that? And I think it is a little bit of a dichotomy, and it's very hard to get the two to play together. So it's just about trying to work out how do we spot the signs and how do we try and reduce those peaks and troughs as much as possible. Probably.
Yep. Anybody else have a thought on this?
So
Everybody came off mute at the same time.
Yeah.
Alicia, I saw you unmute first. It's like a Jeopardy buzzer, and
Yeah, I feel I'm on
in
a
the form
quiz show.
in the form of a question, please. No, go ahead.
So maybe this is a bit of the utopian view, but for the well-being side of things, we've often thought about it as two separate things. There's the well-being of the company and the well-being of your people. And I think the challenge and almost opportunity here is how do we think of it holistically as both elements that need to work together? And our well-being metrics should speak to both of those elements. How we track it, how we maintain it, and how we respond to it should not be in isolation. They need to be balanced. And I think that we need to set up the metrics to set it in that way. We need to be having those conversations at the strategy level, but also at the people level. And it's about that experimentation and trying it out to kind of shift from well-being as separate entities and actually a whole entity of well-being as a company rather than as people and goals. Maybe that's utopian, and I haven't got the answer.
No, I don't think it's utopian. One environment that I was in was a consulting company I was managing years and years ago. And I think two things were simultaneously true about the experience of most staff at the time. We were extremely committed and working very hard. We were traveling a lot. There was a lot of sources of fatigue, and people really enjoyed their experience. And from joy came more energy. And so one of the things that I think a lot about is when we're experiencing joy or enough joy at work, we have a lot of energy. When we aren't experiencing joy, we go to burnout very, very rapidly. Does anybody concur? Is that something you've all thought about?
Yeah, when we enjoy work, then work is better.
Right.
When we enjoy the people that are working alongside us, then we want to go the extra mile for them. When we really love our manager and we enjoy that relationship, then we want to dig in when they say, hey, we have another mile to go, right? And I think what came to mind when you were talking about this dichotomy is actually the last session that I caught the last part of. And I think it can be either or. I think there are a lot of organizations that aren't intentional, that don't care about the well-being piece. And so they're only hyper-focusing on here's the goal and here's what I need to do and go do it, right? And so whatever, impact that makes, nobody's really paying attention to it. And if there's burnout or turnover, maybe the organization's big enough that they don't care about that, right? And I think there's lots of organizations that we admire, who have great employer brands, who are so crystal clear on how employees matter, and they are hitting really big goals. And so it's up to the organization, and it is top down on whether you want to care about it and you want to make it part of that employee proposition, right? That value proposition of you're going to get great work done, you're going to grow, you're going to hit these moonshots, and you're going to have a great time doing it. You're going to be able to have a life. And I think that's something that's important to manage those expectations and to be really clear about what do we care about here. Because I also know some people who don't care about their personal life, and they see that this current stretch of my career, I want to dig in, I want to work 60 hours a week, I want to get to the top of my game, and mazel tov, go do that and find an organization that you match with. But I think it's about that matching of the expectations of what matters to you and what matters to the org, and trying to make sure that makes sense.
I mean, that's super interesting as a thought, because we hear a lot now even about six-day-a-week organizations, startups that are running, easily eight to six minimum and 6 days a week. Maybe that's okay as long as they're clear about what the expectations are and as long as they can staff it with the kind of talent that they need. I mean, I'm always hesitant to be judgmental about an organization if people select in and it works for them and you sign up for it, more power to you. But it's interesting because it seems to be setting some degree of new standard in the industry. And I think the challenge is, of course, if that standard becomes adopted even in organizational environments where it isn't going to be healthy or isn't going to work, or they won't be able to attract and retain talent. Marina, I think you might have had something to add before Nadia jumped in. I mean, not that she interrupted you, but
no, we
I want to give you a
muted at the
chance.
same time. No, really love Nadia's point and everyone else. And I really like what you said, Mark, about, kind of balancing within those systems. And just on our team, at least, just to kind of hone in everyone's points, is we're managing more than individual business outputs, right? Like we're integrating joy and we're integrating the ups and downs. And I think when we're managing individuals, everything that comes with that, it's not just direct output. And so integrating rest and integrating time for the team to go through those troughs and peaks, I think is really important, especially within the business objectives and the systems that you're working within, because, it's not a one-for-one input-output situation. And I think that's really important too. Make sure that, you're integrating into the way that the business operates.
I would just really quickly, actually, just to build on the joy thing. I'm going to sound negative here. I'm going to try not to, but
Warning,
interesting.
here
I
comes
think
negativity.
one thing to guard against with the joy piece, I think, which it's vital, it's important. I think it's really key to have. But so many instances of where I've seen people burn out, the people who have the most joy at work, who are so passionate, who love what they do, who, like Nadia said, go above and beyond for their colleagues, and they are the ones who do work harder often, and they don't even notice they're doing it because they love what they do. And so the people that I see break down and with burnout and struggle, they love their job. So it's not always a case of I don't love my job. It's actually sometimes you can love it too much. And that sounds really like downer of me, but like that's what I've seen a lot of actually, and it's just important to sort of just keep an eye on, I suppose.
No, I think that's very important. And that actually bridges to the next topic I want to have us all think about is leadership, because obviously the leaders of an organization have a outsized amount of power and influence on how people manage their commitment to the organization. And you can extract a lot of energy from people beyond their capacity, especially in, let's call it, high care environments. So there's almost a danger of a high commitment, high care environment really sapping the life out of people if you're not intentional as leaders. So what would we say is the leader's responsibility or ideal way of thinking about managing sustainable energy inside an organization towards sustainable performance? Anyone can jump in first. I'll go to Alicia just because I'm going to move things around. So
So I think the first thing that came to mind as you were talking there is whenever I think about leadership, I'm thinking about the behaviors that's going to be absolutely critical in that. And behaviors are going to be the indication of how you're going to show up as an organization. And they're going to show up sort of what is the type of energy that you bring to the organization. Now, the behaviors are, we might talk about them as values, but effectively they're how you show up every day, how you get work done. They're the anchor point to your operating cadences, how you deliver, what that looks like. And leaders need to be really clear on what those behaviors are. And there'll be a mix of behaviors to hit those goals, to make sure that, you know, people are showing up to deliver high performance. But equally, they need to make sure that there's a balance there of how do you restore energy? How do you protect energy? How do you set those boundaries in the right spaces, in the right places? And that has to be through behaviors as the first point, because that's the shared language at that leadership level that should also represent your strategy, your goals, the company you want to be. Because if they conflict, then that's when it's going to get complex. And also then you'll have leaders leading in different ways. And it's that consistency at that level. So that would be kind of my first port of call, is like attaching behaviors to energy and what that looks like.
It's great. Anyone else on the role of the leader or the responsibility of the leader in maintaining a effective balance of performance and energy?
Probably three like quick things that I'd touch on. One would be sort of the leader's responsibility to actually define and get clear on what we mean by what does high performance look like, and what do we mean when we say performance here. That's so many of the companies we work with, speak to, they haven't got that documented and down, and like that layer is really, really important. If it's not there, it's not clear. So that's a really, really important thing for leadership to work on. I don't necessarily prescribe to the idea of, people always sort of suggest that leaders need to sort of role model this, i.e. they need to find balance and, well, they're, prove to people that they can find this balance. Actually, I think it's okay if a founder wants to work 80-hour weeks. That's sort of to be expected. It's okay for them to do that as long as they don't necessarily expect other people to do that if that's not part of the deal. But what they do need to do as leaders is respect boundaries. And again, this is something that we don't see many teams do, is actually get really, really clear on how we communicate with each other in work, out of work. Are there set hours where we maybe slack each other, and outside of 6 p.m. maybe it's not slack, it's only just something for remote, whatever those rules and those guides are. The majority of companies don't have those, not clear, and that's where you start eroding boundaries a lot as a leader, I find.
Nadia, Marina, anything else on leadership and the leader's role?
Yeah, I think, what Adam's talking about of setting those norms, and I think also resetting them, because a lot of times I come into organizations where they're in a moment of change or transition. They're going through hyper growth, or something else is happening where they need to level up their people operations. And I feel like so often people feel like they've gone through this exercise, but they need to realize you're in a different situation, maybe with a different, even just one person's different on your team, to take the time to actually look at your norms of, when are we on? How are we doing handoffs? What's expected? When are you turning things in? Basics, like I prefer Slack feedback over in a meeting, whatever it is. And I was just looking because there were two reports that I saw in this last week that kind of touched on leadership. One was Atlassian's state of work report that came out for 2025, and they had some stat around like only 7% of execs are confident that teamwork connects to goals. And I thought that was so interesting, where it's just like, okay. And I think that ties back to the conversation around like clarity. If execs don't have that confidence, and it's like, I point the finger at them, and why don't people have that clarity and that focus in your organization to even understand how their work should be tying to it? And then Gallup put out like another report. I don't know if it was this week or last week, but they were saying like engagement has dropped back to COVID levels. And they were pointing to workload, unclear goals, and bad management driving it. And that's another leadership aspect where it's like, why are you so unclear on your goals? And what does it look like for management to be supportive and actually helping their employees accomplish what needs to happen. And I think going back to change managers, like over communication and meeting people where they're at and really understanding where your team is, from a mindset place, but also a balance place, like overload, and clearly understanding where do we need to move people, and who can work on that moonshot, or who can work on that aggressive project. It's not everybody in the company, and really making sure that we're focused.
It makes me think, and then Marina, I'll ask you to answer this, that we've seen a lot in the last, say, year, 2 years from famous executive tech pundits, or CEOs about, I don't want to have to manage the performance of my people. If I have to manage the performance of my people, they're not the right people. I want to be completely hands off. There's some famous CEOs who have, 25 direct reports and basically say they never do one-on-ones. There's almost a funny trend, at least in the tech sector, of I don't got time to give people goals and supervise them. What do we make of that, really, especially as it relates to this topic and the topic of, what a number of you have just said is like, be clear on what you're asking your people, make sure they have clarity of accountability, make sure they're supported in achieving their ends. But then you have this, let's say, popular press focus on good tech companies have no performance management at all. Like, WTF? Any Marina, you wanna start on that one? Like, what do we make of that?
Well, culture is the engine, I think, of everything behind organization. And so if the leaders aren't taking the time to listen to their team and, pour back into them and focus on their goals, then, you're going to have unrealistic expectations of what they're needing from you, what your team is needing, and vice versa, and kind of that feedback loop. And I think that's how you can operationalize things to be healthier systems, and making sure that you have kind of those integrated expectations, like Alicia, Nadia, and Adam were talking about, of making sure that the team is aligned. And I think some cultures can work within that. And like we were saying, with if the expectation is 8-hour work weeks, and that you won't have a weekly manager one-on-one and those things, and you're willing to work within that, and the expectation is clear, that's one story. But I think then if the expectation and reality are unbalanced, I think that's when you run into larger issues in the organization.
Yeah, anyone else on this? Do you find it interesting, odd, contradictory? I'm just really struggling with this at a time when there's a lot of attention on kind of outlying organizations. Part of my thinking on it is, look, I've never seen an organization, like, nobody gets hurt by having a decent one-on-one every week, where like it's not doing harm to anybody. And I think the outliers are more outlying because of other circumstances, and it just happens that maybe the CEO doesn't do one-on-ones. But it strikes me that it's really important in an age where things are moving so fast to be very clear about leaders helping their organization achieve sensibly and on pace and without burnout. So yeah, a couple of you are nodding. Adam, what do you think about this?
I think it's okay, weirdly.
Yep.
If you've got the right people and the right level of transparency, communication across the business, the right visibility around goals. The flip side to this is I see the majority of companies have got performance processes, one-to-ones in place, but execute them very badly.
Right. Right.
What's the point in doing this as a performative
Right.
exercise? It's not going to help people, actually. So I think, again, I've managed people before who haven't needed one-to-ones or wanted one-to-ones, but they know they can come to me very, very ad
Whenever they
hoc,
want to. Yeah.
ever
Yeah.
need anything.
Mhm.
And operating in that way actually is way faster, way easier, way better, than sort of blocking down people with like process. So I think if someone's going to try and replicate that model because they see a big tech CEO say that,
Yeah.
like, I do this, I don't do it, that is an issue if they can't put the right ways of work around it. If there's the key thing really is you've got to have some transparency around goals, objectives, direction. There might be people who can set their own goals really well without too much hand holding. Or there might be the people that's not. It's contextual, and you need
Yep.
to work out what do we need, who have we got here, and what's going to work for us. Again, people try and apply cookie cutter copy and paste type approaches to performance in particular, I find, and it doesn't work very well, is my experience.
Yep. Nadia, you were nodding your head earlier. Did you want to jump in?
People who don't want to do performance in general, I think there's an answer for you. You could be an architect of one and use all the AI tools, and you don't need to deal with humans. There's lots of choices. When we look at an organization that's layered, what Adam's saying, I think about alignment. The opportunity, whether you're doing it in an actual one-on-one or you have systems in place where it's pushing and pulling that information between a manager and direct report, where people understand what is most critical, what's your P1 right now, because things are happening so fast that if you don't need a one-on-one, then does that mean that nothing's happening in the organization? That there's no new blockers happening? That there's no new, issues or roadblocks or developments that might be getting in that person's way to get the thing done? Or even from the top, that the ecosystem has shifted, that we need to think about things differently and making sure that everybody's aligned on that. I think it's just such a missed opportunity when people don't realize. And I saw someone in the chat talk about, if you don't do one-on-ones, you're only going to make your overall job more difficult. And I think people just don't have the right systems and tools, to Adam's point, where it's just inefficient. And so they think it's not effective, or they don't have real training and understanding of the impact of what it means to be a leader and a manager, and how those touch points help move people forward at an accelerated rate. And I think when people understand ROI and they see it in real time, then they invest in it. But when they don't, then they back up from it and they blame the people, right? And that's that fundamental attribution error. It's like, it's you, not me. And how do I think a lot of people in this audience are HR focused, and it's like, okay, so what does it look like to make sure that we have the right tools and systems in place, that we're not copying and pasting something that works somewhere else, and that we can really make it fit and make sense at this place. Maybe we don't have time for an hour one-on-one, and maybe it's a 15-minute moment, and maybe most of it is async. That's okay. But it's trying to figure out, like, how does this work so that we are always hyper aligned? Because this conversation is about, like, big goals. And big goals change over time. Big goals aren't done in 2 days. So, I think Adam's totally right that people could probably manage their own goals if they're really smart ICs, but they're head down. And how can we help them see the bigger system so that they don't stumble over their own feet?
Well, and what works, I think a couple of you said basically this, what works for NVIDIA is not something that you should just grab and put into your 5-person startup, because there's been a whole context of work, company evolution, standards, culture, values, leadership, trends, absolutely being in the right tech at the right time. I mean, there's all these ands. So why would you go? I mean, it's like, it'd be like a little league team and going and copying, like, one of the New York teams in baseball. It's like, it doesn't make any sense to just grab and smash something into your environment that has been built for that environment. It strikes me that what's similar, and I'm wondering if you all agree, what's similar about every environment that is moonshotting, that is really moving its people without burnout towards an amazing goal, is fundamentally based on communication and trust. Like, it's very difficult to imagine a circumstance where you don't have those elements that is getting to the moonshot. Would you agree with that? Alicia, do you want to?
Yeah, I think that's critical. And I think the trust element you just mentioned there, creating that psychological safety so that people can speak up and talk about these things and stay aligned. So to Nadia's point, it's about, if you've got the environment where people can have ad hoc conversations, where you're keeping on track, you think if anything's off track, you can actually kind of check in on an ad hoc basis, you can work together at pace. That's great, but that psychological safety has to be there. And the way you communicate and information flows has to be there as well. And I think the other supporting aspect behind that is, what's the cadence in how you operate that sits underneath that? And that's fundamentally kind of the system that will pull the psychological safety and communication and put it into action each day. So yeah, totally agree. That's core to it.
Adam?
Sorry, coming off mute there. Yeah, I think like underlying trust in particular is you build that by people feeling that there's some consistency in how we work. Like you know how your leaders are going to show up on a daily basis. You know the behaviors you're going to see day to day from colleagues and how we do things, how we communicate, how we do this, how we do that. That's all stuff you've got to be super intentional about building. And so that's not an easy task. It takes a long time, but I think that for me underpins teams' abilities to work well together. And suddenly have a little bit more freedom and ability to get on and do what they need to do and not be bogged down by checking in on something or having too many meetings, or those are the things that often slow companies down and slow company performance down rather than just individual performance. Where we saw a lot of like wastage there, as it were. So
And burnout, back to the topic of
burnout,
like of
wastage,
energy and yeah.
frustration, friction, all these tiny things add up and people lose that joy and they actually feel like this is getting frustrating now. So yeah, it's complex, but that's where I sort of see it to Alicia's point is that what sits underneath is a lot of like what companies should be thinking proactively about.
So last topic, and this is a doozy and a can of worms considering what we're doing right now, which is Zoom and distributed work. The distributed work era has been upon us for a while now. Even before COVID, obviously, it was building momentum, and then COVID shot us all onto the other side for a while, and now we're having some stress as people argue and figure out how and when and if to roll back in. In terms of balancing high performance and stress, like the focus of this topic, how does distributed work or hybrid work or return to office, how does that inform how leaders should think about all these topics, if it does at all? Since this is part of our reality now, and this is what we're doing right now, and a lot of people are still figuring out how to do this effectively, being work effectively in non-physical presences. How does that impact this quest for balancing energy and achievement? Marina, how about you first?
Yeah, I think, obviously big question in terms of how that relates to what we're all, discussing today. I think, obviously makes me think about expectation and everything we're discussing about clear expectation. So, not having, an if or what, how are we handling this? But, being very clear on your organizational approach to, okay, if we are doing return to office, kind of here's the plan. And if we are staying distributed or we're staying fully remote, here's a plan on how we can support the fully remote work. So, tying that back to expectations and clear leadership communication amongst the leadership team, so that as that, communication distributed down, either in large organizational conversations or individually doing these either one-on-ones if they exist or do not exist, in terms of the employee, manager check-ins. And then also, with those expectations, understanding if there's, documentation, if and with those systems and scalability too, because, the organization is constantly changing. And when you're bringing in, new hires into these systems, and like Adam was speaking and Alicia were speaking to those underlying systems and kind of pulses and cadences underneath everything. If the documentation isn't there to very quickly clue people into how you work, and those, systems aren't clear, it's going to bog down the joy of the team, is going to bog down all the other systems, so that there isn't time to do that heads down work, that actually move forward on those organizational larger goals.
Makes complete sense. Anybody else on this struggle about how and where we work and how it affects these questions of energy and performance? Nadia, you nodding your head, so you next.
I think even though this has been around for a while, I think slowing down to speed up and really thinking about, like, they talked about intention in the last session and being really intentional about what's the employee experience that we want here. And when we set that up for success, thinking about, like, how do we rethink visibility of their work, of our expectations, of where do they go for what? That literal making it so easy to have line of sight to what is our North Star and what are you focusing on and why is that important? And it doesn't need to be a million meetings with people, right? And how do we not copy and paste the in-person experience and create something different? And just thinking about access to that. And Marina brought up that point of like cutting the noise down. And I think what we found in remote work, because we're copying and pasting so much, that the noise increased. It's so much Slacks and so many emails and so many meetings that you're still having that it's harder to latch onto the signal that you need to do, which is all of this doesn't matter as much as you completing these 2 things this week, period. And how do we get to that place? And I think the other opportunity that I heard at Charter's Summit on AI, the chief innovation officer, I think, of Microsoft was talking about how innovative they were thinking about handoffs. And I thought it was so brilliant thinking about like, why are we working 9 to 5? And when we're in a remote environment and we don't have to think about commuting to the office and working at night or any of that, of like, when do you work best? And how do we make it really clear of like, I'm off, I'm on, I'm picking up my kids, I'm doing what I need. And it being okay to do that and modeled from the top. But I think we have so many exciting places to go to from a remote design space that directly links to moonshots, building goals, high performance, getting exactly what we need out of people. But it just takes us slowing down a bit to think about it and build it out. And
to be intentional, to be really thoughtful and intentional. Okay, so to close out, I'm going to ask you each to answer a question in the following way. So one do and one don't. So imagine a CEO, founder comes to you. They are running, I don't know, it doesn't matter what the size of the organization, but let's say they really want to get this right. Like, I want to be able to build a company that can sustain high performance over the long term, and not just like chew through staff. I want it to be the team. I want the team to be around as much as possible. I want them to feel like they're part of this. What is one do and one don't, or one do and one avoid? Giving you only got those 2 bullet points because they're passing you in a hallway somewhere. So let's start with Adam, and we'll move through everybody else.
Oh, I knew you'd come to me first. I've talked about both of these things already, but just I guess as a bit of a wrap up, like do get clear with people on what we mean when we say performance. It seems silly, but that's really important to do. Most people don't really have clarity on that. Don't blindly copy what works for someone else at another company. Get clear on what's going to be good for you.
How about Marina?
A version of Adam's, but definitely do have clear expectations and communication. And I would say, don't allow a lot of time to pass before you invest in those systems and organizational, clarity.
Roger. Alicia?
Yes to all the above, and do always think about people needs and business goals, and don't forget to build the system to support both as well.
When we say system, what do we mean? Sorry, I just want to
I
get
mean
one more thought from you.
the operating system that sits under that. So effectively how you do things around here and getting really clear on
How we
that
do things around here.
consistently.
Technically,
Yeah.
non-technically, just the processes of work on a daily basis. Perfect.
Yeah.
Nadia, last word.
Agreed with all. And I think you don't hit moonshots as a team by brute force. And you do by really arming your managers with the tools and systems that they need. I think if we're talking about real change, it's about getting them exactly what they need, whether that's a really quick check-in system or a template, or working with them on what's the best one-on-one to do. But from a leader's perspective, for them just to understand, you need to invest in your managers to help make this happen.
Well, thank you all, panelists, amazing panelists, and thank you all wonderful attendees who are all out there. Thank you, and have a great rest of Pando Horizons and a great rest of your day, no matter what time of day it is out there for you all across this blue marble. Cheers, and see you at other sessions. Bye-bye, all.
Thanks. Bye.